Well, I've always loved movies, and it was something ever since I was a kid. I always knew I was going to make movies, and then as I got older, then I learned more about what I wanted to make movies about, and the first thing that I chose as a subject for movies was the nature of culture and cultural identity, and I didn't want to do it in a really serious way. I wanted to do it in a fun and entertaining way, so that I think that especially at the time that I made it, which is I guess 8 years ago now, I was really more interested in comedy than in any other genre. So. But I mean, it all started out with I just always loved movies, and I never really got interested in making movies until I saw my first Woody Allen movie, because that was the first time I could sort of see, hey, I could do this, you know. Up until that time, all I saw were typical Hollywood blockbusters that didn't really have much depth to them.
Okay. There you are, Yuji. The question about what is the purpose? Yeah.
What is your purpose, and what do you want to get through this movie?
I think that what I wanted the idea that I wanted to show with this movie is that people aren't necessarily defined exclusively by their culture. They're identified, it's their personality that makes them who they are. And people's personalities sort of exceed cultural boundaries. They're not directly, just because somebody's an American doesn't mean that they're one way, and just because somebody's Japanese doesn't mean that they're another. So that's why I have a main character who's a Caucasian guy, but he's kind of taken on this stereotypical persona of a Japanese person. And by the same token, there's also a lot of other characters that don't seem to fit in their own cultural grid. So there were a lot of serious things that I was thinking about at the time that I made the movie, but first and foremost, I wanted it to be fun and entertaining, but have the ideas come through later when people are thinking about it after they've already seen the film. Does that sense? Am I talking? I'm not talking too fast, am I?
No.
Oh, good. Okay, go ahead.
Speed was 大丈夫. Okay, I think you're fine. Thank you.
Okay, all right, good.
Why you avoid yourself on the movie? I mean, I think you can use an actor if you want it.
Yeah, actors cost money. So I needed an actor who would work for free, and so that was me. Also, the other challenge was that since Boyd speaks Japanese, I needed an actor who could speak Japanese at least well enough for the part. And it's actually surprisingly rare in America to be able to find like American actors who speak decent Japanese. So I decided to play the part myself. And also, I mean, at the same time, at that time in my career, I wanted to be like Woody Allen, write, direct, and star, and kind of make movies that were kind of not autobiographical, but where I was basically like more of a comedian than an actor. But after I made Big Dreams Little Tokyo, I didn't want to do that anymore. I just wanted to focus on being behind the camera after that. So.
Some of the people who ask questions haven't made it in yet, so I'm deciding who I should give the question to. Can you read this question? It's not from you, but it's from... Onegaishimasu. Okay, are you...
Boy is a diligent and quiet man. Do you think he is an ideal Japanese? And is he the kind of Japanese you would like to be?
No, I don't think Boyd is an ideal Japanese because I don't think that there is such a thing as an ideal Japanese person. I think that the way that Boyd acts is kind of like his own idea of what an ideal Japanese person should be. But I don't have the same opinion as Boyd necessarily. I think that people should just be who they are. But you know, Boyd has this sort of weird idea that if he acts, you know, like with the business cards and with the bowing, and if he speaks Keigo really well, that he'll be accepted. But you know, it's better to just kind of be who you are. You know, you see like the Mexican businessman who comes in at the end, and he doesn't know anything about Japanese culture. But in the end, he's the one who connects with the other Japanese business guys more than anybody else because he's just being himself. So I think that like I'm not quite sure what the best way to describe it is, but Boyd is sort of like somebody who's very confused about cultural identity in a lot of ways, and the movie kind of shows in a lighthearted way his you know, coming to terms with who he is, and also, you know, learning a little bit more about kind of the nature of the world and how he doesn't need to try so hard. He just needs to be cool, and yeah, I mean, that's about it.
Okay. Yuji, you had a question about the sumo wrestler?
Why is the main Japanese character a sumo wrestler?
Well, the reason is because you know, he's Japanese American, and like Boyd, he really yearns for some sort of belonging. You know, he wants to feel like he's accepted or important. And so for somebody like him who's grown up in America but he's Japanese heritage, I thought what would be like the most iconic Japanese symbol that he could strive to be, and I thought that a sumo would be the perfect thing, because it's such a, at least for us in America, you know, a sumo is like a symbol of Japanese culture in a lot of ways. He wants so badly to be Japanese, and not like looked at as being neither one or the other, that he basically goes for the most Japanese identity that he can, and that's a sumo wrestler.
Yuki, can we get to your question?
How did you create such a complex characters? For example, the Japanese man who can speak English very well, but his figure looks like small as a...
It's funny, like there's actually especially in the Asian American community, there's a lot of people like Jerome. I think that you know, the movie's a comedy, so everything is greatly exaggerated. But a lot of people in America, where there's people with many different kinds of heritage, there's a lot of people who really sort of struggle to figure out who they are, what their cultural identity is. So for Jerome, I think that for that character, it actually wasn't very hard to come up with it, because so many of my friends had had similar experiences as him, including the actor who plays Jerome. He was born in America and raised in America, and then moved to Japan when he was 12. And he never learned to speak Japanese very well. And he sometimes felt in Japan like he didn't belong because he couldn't speak Japanese very well, and the people around him didn't feel like he was real Japanese. And so he went back to America, and then after that, you know, he identifies as Japanese American, but I think that, you know, at least especially when he was like high school age, he had a lot of back and forth in his mind of, you know, am I Japanese or am I American? Is it okay to be both? And so I think those kinds of like cultural dilemmas are really quite common in what we call the Asian American community. But it's probably quite shocking and new to see that sort of thing in a film like this in Japan. I mean, let me ask you guys something. Does Jerome's does his personality and his like inner dilemma, does it make sense to you when you watch the movie, or is it really puzzling?
You understand the question? Do you want to ask the question in Japanese, Dave, or do you want me to help the students through it?
Go ahead. Yeah, help them through it. If you don't mind.
Okay. So he explains sort of how, like for the character of Jerome, the guy who wants to become the sumo wrestler, he's kind of looking for a feeling of connection, of belonging, right? Because he's American and he's Japanese, but he doesn't really feel connected to either identity, right? And so he figures to be really accepted as Japanese, like the most Japanese thing that he could be would be a sumo wrestler. That's like really Japanese, right? And so he's asking, from a Japanese perspective or Korean perspective, did that make sense to you? Like for an American audience, where people come from different countries, or their parents or grandparents come from different countries, many people try to feel a connection both to America and to the country their parents or their family came from. And so Jerome is kind of looking for some kind of connection. But did that make sense to you watching the film? Somebody speak up, because he can't really see your faces very well. Your heads are small on the screen, so.
I mean, I think the thing that he struggles with is, like, 自分が日本人でもないし、アメリカ人でもないから、どこに行っても、外国人だっていう感じがすごく強いので、でもそういう気持ちは、ここのアメリカの日系のコミュニティの間ではすごくよくあることなので、so when people in America watch this movie, like, his Jerome makes sense. You know, the character, like, really is, everybody understands it right away. You know, like, they get that. But I think in, you know, if that's not like a community that you're familiar with, then I imagine that the movie seems a little bit weird. You know, like, why is there the sumo guy?
What did you think seeing Jerome, the character of Jerome? Many people asked questions about Jerome. I had a lot of questions about the sumo wrestler. That was one of the most popular questions. So what did people think about when you saw the sumo character in the film? Yuki, what did you think?
of the symbol of Japan.
Voice, this bigger voice. We can be.
But now in my generation, small is not so popular and now small is not related with our now it's not
Yeah.
now small is not related with our life deeply, so when I saw your movie, I felt a little bit strange because small is
日本語でもいいよ。
相撲があまり今はなんか文化的には日本のシンボル的なものではあるけど、私たちの生活に直接関わりがないので、なんていうかあまり、少し変な感じがする。なんか相撲がそういう今の日本人を代表するものやっていうふうに映っていることが、はい、すみません日本語で。
Okay.
アメリカでは日本日本の代表的なこととして思われていることは大体そうです。日本の代表的なことだというと、侍とか相撲とか、だからジェロームみたいな日系人の経験によると、日本についてなんか考えてることとか、その代表的なこととして思ってることは大体時代遅れのことばかりですよ。So that's kind of why his fantasy about becoming becoming more Japanese is kind of based on false images. And it's the same with Boyd. His fantasy about how he's going to fit into Japan is based on stereotypes or sort of exaggerations or things that are not quite accurate. Both of them, they just need to realize that it's okay to just be who you are. You don't have to try too hard.
Other questions about the sumo wrestler in English or Japanese? Come on, people had good questions about the sumo wrestler. What did you think when you saw the sumo wrestler, the character of the sumo wrestler? You're looking at me and smiling, so you can answer the question. You can answer the question. Try not to take my computer out with this. The cord's reaching right across there.
I feel strange when I saw the small wrestler because she as she said, I think this is the generation gap. I don't think the small wrestler is a Japanese. The Japanese culture as the symbol of Japanese culture. So I feel strange. But if you didn't use small wrestler as the symbol of Japanese wrestler, I think you couldn't show the Japanese identity or symbol. So this movie is I think for American. Most of Japanese see this movie maybe feel strange because I never seen the station, the small restaurant walks through the housing place. So I think most of Japanese feel strange. Most of Japanese feel strange when we see this movie. But
Yeah, I mean, he's not supposed to be like a real. He wants to become a sumo, but he's never, he's never able to. I think that Hey Robert, did they watch it? I guess there is no version of the movie with Japanese subtitles out there.
No, I think there's just the English subtitles with when they're speaking Japanese in the film.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot of the movie that gets a little bit lost in translation, just because of the. I mean, I can see where people would think that was weird, but maybe like with a really good Japanese translation of the English dialogue, his character would be more rewarding and interesting. I do think though that for Japanese American people, a lot of what they hold as symbols of their heritage are actually based on the Japan of many years ago. Like if you go to Little Tokyo or Japantown in California, everything is very like old Japan. All the design and everything. I think that would be very shocking to a Japanese person because it's not based on the Japan of today. It's based on the Japan of 100 years ago. So I think you're right. It is directed more towards an American audience. But I wish that the movie had been distributed in Japan with a really good translation, because I think that there's nuances that get lost in his character without like a perfect understanding of everything that's happening.
No, I have a question about bilingual film.
I think a bilingual film is hard to watch. We should watch and read in the same time. But audience feels the story is more realistic. Why did you choose to make a bilingual film?
Oh, I always hate it in American movies when everybody speaks English, even though it's not realistic. I also think that it's more interesting if everybody's realistically speaking the language that they would in real life. But you're right, it's a challenge because a lot of people don't like to read subtitles, or people think it's too tiring to watch a movie in multiple languages. But I've always been of the belief that movies with many different languages can kind of help different cultures get to know about each other, or at least create like a dialogue about culture and differences in language.
Okay. Masaya, you had a question about learning Japanese. Reach. Stretch it out. There you go.
Why did you try to learn Japanese?
I learned I learned Japanese as a Mormon missionary in Australia. I didn't know anything about Japan, but I was assigned to a Japanese-speaking congregation. So you guys are probably too young to know Kent Gilbert or Kent Darracott, right?
Yeah, I don't think Kent Gilbert's on TV here anymore.
Yeah, that was like 20 years ago.
Kent Gilbert was a sort of a gaijin talento on Japanese TV, kind of like Dave Spector is on TV all the time now. 20 years ago, it was Kent Gilbert on TV all the time in Japan.
So I learned to speak Japanese in Australia. It wasn't something that I chose. It was an assignment, but I really loved the language and the culture, so I kept studying, and I learned it in university, and now I use it in my work. My first two films had a Japanese language component to them, and then the new one that I'm directing now is also actually a Japanese co-production. So yeah, I mean, it's turned out to be something that was very serendipitous, but really interesting at the same time, because I found that I really loved the language and learning more about the culture and all kinds of things. So
Takahiro guy. You're Takahiro. I have first names out here, and often I look at people's last names when I on my roll sheet, and so I'm like, well, which one's Takahiro? Okay, I apologize. Here's one of your questions. Sorry, Yuji, if you get the cord around your
It seems to me that the Japanese women in the movie are stereotyped traditional character. On contrary, the men are not, and they look funny and sometimes foolish. Do you have that image?
No, I actually don't think that the women in the film are stereotypes. I think that's probably feels like that when you only have the Japanese language portion of it. I mean, part of it is the whole movie is kind of from Boyd's perspective, and his understanding of Japanese culture and of the language and everything around him is a little bit skewed. It's a little bit inaccurate. But in the end, it's Boyd who learns the lessons about culture and not the other people. In contrast, I think that probably the most foolish character in the movie is Boyd. The Japanese characters and the Japanese American characters in the end are the ones that turn out to be right about most everything, and Boyd is sort of stuck in this fantasy world. The reason that a lot of the other characters might come off as mean to him is simply because Boyd is wrong. So I think that in order to deconstruct stereotypes, you often have to present them and then turn them around. For example, the girl, the nurse character, she may seem like a stereotype at first, but she's actually a much stronger person than Boyd or Jerome is.
I think we're going to turn it this way, so we got a question in the corner. There you are. And yeah, that's you on there. I'm going to knock my computer off with this cord, so let me move the cord so I destroy my computer. Okay. And
I think I need to be stereotypes in films to make many characters to some extent. How do you think?
Let's see. Well, there is. Sometimes you do. If you're making a movie that's about stereotypes, then you often some of the characters need to be like it in movies we call it typecasting. Like if you want like a guy who's a nerd, then you cast somebody who looks like a nerd. If you want a guy who's like an athletic guy, then you cast an athletic guy. So I think that, like, to a certain extent, so that people understand, like, who the characters are right from the very beginning, there is a certain extent of necessity of that. But I think when you're making a movie that's about culture and about stereotypes, like this one is, you kind of have to use stereotypes in a certain way and then deconstruct them. That's sort of a hard to explain concept. Like you think one thing at first, but then the character becomes deeper and deeper the more you get to know them. That's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of in this movie is, at least to a certain extent, there's a lot of stereotypes that are deconstructed or turned on their head or done in other ways. And I don't know if the nuances of that come through if there are no subtitles on the English dialogue, but that was my intent when I was making the movie.
How about your next question, Pastor?
Do you think that among American people they have still images based on discriminatory stereotypes of Asian people? If so, why?
I think sometimes yes, but you have to be careful. I think it's important not to make like a total generalization about all Americans. I do think that there definitely are people who are very ignorant about Asian culture and a lot of like Asian actors will tell you whenever they go out for a role, whenever they go in for an audition, they're always expected to play very stereotyped characters. I think that the media has definitely started to change in the last couple of years. Up until about 10 years ago, there were hardly any Asian actors on TV in America. Most of the time on TV shows, all the characters were, white, black, or Hispanic. But then, starting like 10 years ago, more and more now there are Asian people on mainstream American TV shows. And I think that's actually had a big effect on American culture and how people, if people believe in Asian the typical stereotypes of Asian people. So my answer to your question is yes. I do think that there is a problem, but I do think that it's starting to change.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Tsuyoshi. What are your... Okay, we gotta move things around here. I feel like a talk show host. Carrying the microphone around. I'm Phil Donahue. Okay, you had a question. Which question was it now? I'm trying to forget what the question was. But why he chose Japan? Right? And I gotta fix the cord so it'll reach. There we go. Get a wireless mic.
What is the reason why you choose Japan? What do you think about other countries?
Well, the reason I chose Japan is because I made this movie 8 years ago, and by that point I had been speaking Japanese pretty much every day for 4 years, and so I felt like I was immersed in Japanese culture. It was simply the culture besides my own that I had experienced more than any other. But there's also another culture explored in Big Dreams Little Tokyo, and that's the Latino culture. You know, with the Mexican businessman and the guy who translates for him. So I like to think of the movie as being a multicultural movie and not just two cultures. I'm very interested in making movies in other cultures and other countries as well. But the only two languages I speak are English and Japanese. So I've had more opportunities to explore American and Japanese culture than any other.
Takahiro. Oh, there you are. Okay. Sorry, juggling too many things. Here you go. It's one of your questions. I didn't have you that before. I'm sorry. Follow-up question. I think it's related. When you just asked.
Specifically, which portion of Japan or Japanese are you interested in?
Well,
is there a specific part of Japanese culture, Japanese society that kind of keeps drawing you back in as you have multiple films with that use the language?
I think it's usually specific people that draw me in, or specific places. You know, when I made Big Dreams Little Tokyo, I met an actor named Watanabe Hiroshi, and then he starred in my next movie after that. And then recently I met an actor named Kitamura Kazuki, and then he's starring in my new film that I'm directing right now. And so it's I think there are definitely a lot of things about Japanese culture that really interest me, and I also love, you know, if we're talking geographically specific areas, I love Osaka. When the first time I went to Japan, I went to Osaka, so for me that feels like the real Japan. But I'd say that, you know, more than something specific about Japanese culture, it's just the many different Japanese people who are a part of my life, who I work with, and talented Japanese actors that make me want to, you know, include Japanese cultural elements in my films. You know, so I definitely I love the language, and I love Japanese cinema, Japanese movies and things. So it's hard to narrow it down to just one thing. There's many different factors.
Why did you establish Little Tokyo as a stage?
Well, is there Little Tokyo provides an interesting context. Like, for you watching this movie in Japan, seeing this guy dressed as a sumo wrestler and having a lot of these sort of kitschy Japanese decorations in their apartment seems very strange. But setting it in Little Tokyo or a Japantown type of area, I think for American audiences, then a lot of that stuff in context makes more sense because it's a place where sort of a lot of symbols of Japan are preserved, but they're kind of a little bit not quite accurate. So symbolically, Little Tokyo was important to me because it's kind of like fake Japan. You know, in America, if you go to Little Tokyo, it's not anything like Japan at all. It's like a fake Japan themed neighborhood. So for the themes of the movie, it's really, really resonant to Americans, but I can imagine that might be a little bit puzzling to a Japanese audience. Have any of you guys been to Little Tokyo or Japantown in America?
Nobody's been? San Francisco or Los Angeles or?
サンフランシスコの場合はジャパンタウンと呼ばれてますけど、ロサンゼルスのリトル東京とか行ったことありますか？誰か。
1%.
ありますか？What did you think?
I've ever been to Japan in San Francisco, and I thought it's different, very different.
In what way?
Kind of fake, right?
Yeah, fake.
Well, in San Francisco, it's also a shopping mall.
Yeah, there's a shopping mall like Japanese character like Pokemon, and there's many shops and food. Japanese, there are many Japanese restaurants, but
まずいですよ、あそこのレストラン。
yeah, I went to a sushi restaurant, but the Chinese man cooks Japanese food, so it's kind of fake. But in little Japanese town in San Francisco, there are many Japanese and Japanese American. So yeah, in the Japanese town, I could speak the Japanese, but the shop and restaurant is kind of fake, so I felt strange, so strange.
See that strangeness when you guys see the sumo in my movie, it's the same strangeness you'll feel if you go to Little Tokyo or Japantown in America. That's the feeling that I'm trying to give you in this movie. You know, Boyd and his sumo friend, you know, they're very nice people, but when it comes to, you know, their understanding of Japanese culture, it's like, なんかちょっと違うよね。
Yeah, I think so.
You go for a lot of sushi is very popular in the United States right now. So you go into a lot of the restaurants. As soon as you walk in, everybody yells out, and then the sushi chefs then start speaking Chinese to each other. Like maybe the only Japanese they know is you yell it when someone walks in, and then you go back to speaking Mandarin or Cantonese.
Or Spanish.
Or Spanish, right. Masaya, You had a question on. Can you pass this back? Relationship between Japan and America.
What do you think about relationships between Japan and America?
Do you mean between the two governments or between American people and Japanese people?
Japanese people and American people.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that there's, I know a lot of Japanese people and American people who seem to get along great. And then there's other times where, here's what I think. In terms of like Japanese people and American people getting to know each other, oftentimes people's personality quirks are written off as a cultural difference, when in fact it's just that guy. I'm trying to think of a good example, but I mean, my friend, he's Japanese, and he had a roommate who drank a lot of beer, like all the time. He's always drinking. And so, since that was his first American roommate, then his impression was, oh, all Americans just drink all the time, you know? They're always drunk. Drunken Americans. But in reality, there's a great variety of American people, and you know, not all of them are. So I'll put it this way. I think a lot of the stereotypes that exist, you know, among Japanese people about Americans and among Americans about Japanese people are actually more like misunderstandings based on, you know, just people that they happen to meet, and not necessarily indicative of the entire culture. But I do think that a lot of things that are cultural differences are actually language differences. Because I do think that the language barrier between Japanese and Americans is pretty huge. But yeah, I mean, in general, I mean, it seems like we should all be able to get along just fine. I'm not sure if I answered your question at all. If there's a little bit more specific thing that you're asking about.
Did he answer your question? So Ifuni, is that the answer you were looking for? Yeah? Okay. It reminds me of the example of when my kids went to Japanese elementary school for a couple years, and my daughter, she was 6 at the time, and would love to just run up and greet kids with these giant, just bear hugs, just literally just almost attack them with these giant hugs. And the teachers were thinking, American kids, it's American culture, they just give all of these, they're just hugging all the time. And I tell them, you know, my son doesn't do that. And it's just her. It's just like, it's my daughter's sort of 自分の文化。アメリカの文化じゃなくて、もう彼女の文化。彼女はそうだから。She's just, you know. So the Japanese kids learn to, when she would come up, to put their hand out and just shake her hand. Hi, nice, you know, good morning. And then if she's shaking their hand, then she won't come up and just attack them. But any behavior, since my kids were the only 2 American kids in the school, anything they did became representative of how Americans in general act as somehow, you know, indicative, representing American culture, even if it's only those 2 people. How about your question about Japanese manners and Americans' view of Japanese manners?
What do you think about Japanese manners in your view?
His view, or 一般的にアメリカの?
So American's view.
I think in general, Americans really, well, Americans who don't know anything about Japan, then it just seems kind of strange and different to them. but people who have had like extensive dealings with Japanese people, I think, really appreciate, a lot of aspects of Japanese culture. So, I mean, I know that for me, I really appreciate a lot of things about Japanese manners, whereas some things about American manners drive me absolutely crazy sometimes. But it's hard to even it's hard to even like say exactly what Japanese manners are, because まあ人間はみんなそれぞれですからね。みんなマナーが違うし、人間は文化とかによって区別されてるわけじゃなくて、自分の性格にもよるから、it's hard to say anything that's about everybody, because everybody's so different. But in general, I think Americans like and appreciate Japanese manners as much as they understand them, which is not very well in a lot of cases.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's spin it over. I can't tell if I can see you or not on there. Kaori, are you on there? Oh, which one's you? I'm trying to. Which way do I go? Where? She's the one who's standing. Okay, it's hard to tell on the little screen from here. It's this tiny little dot in the corner. I can't tell.
I see her.
There you are. Okay.
What do you think about Japanese and Asians? Are there differences between them?
Do you mean like Japanese and people from other parts of Asia?
Yes, Japanese and other Asians.
Okay, I see. Well, I mean, anytime there's a language difference, then there's going to be a cultural difference. But that said, I've met people from all over the place, and everybody's so different. It's hard to keep them like in a cultural box. やっぱりどこに行っても言語が違うと文化も違うじゃないですか。それでも文化の違いとかを数えてもまあ人間はみんなそれぞれ自分の性格があるしみんなそれぞれ違うから一般的に I wouldn't want to say that everybody's different, that's for sure, even within one culture or one language. I do think that it's interesting that, well, what am I trying to say here? Like, I definitely think that, like, cultural pride is, like, a really great thing. And in America, since we have what's called, like, a melting pot culture, like, people from all kinds of different cultures all over the world. I'm not sure if the melting pot is a concept you guys have talked about yet, but, it's like, yeah, cultures are different, but I think that's something to celebrate.
I think too from thank you, Cody.
Thank you.
From
Thank you.
in talking in the U.S., you hear a lot about Asian culture. People make references to so that, like it's just one thing, and and then you say that to students here in Japan, and they look at you like, what? Like, we're not the same. Like, what? That. So there's, I think, a greater feeling of affinity of connection among Asian Americans because of how they're positioned in American society as Asians, and a commonality of experience of how they're racialized in the U.S. But in Asia, people not seeing themselves as saying, well, no, Japan and Korea and China and all these other countries are different places. And dramatically different places. And so this idea of cultural connections or what countries have in common or what marks them as different is, I think, very different because the context is so different here in Asia versus in the U.S., that the understanding among people of how similar or how different they are is also pretty different, which I think makes for some interesting comparisons. That it tells us a lot about the context of race and culture in the United States when how things like being Asian, how they mean different things in the U.S. compared to in Asia itself.
Yeah, that's definitely something when they watch Better Luck Tomorrow, or maybe
we're watching that next week.
Yeah, I mean that movie is a perfect example because all the kids in that movie, they're all from different backgrounds, but it's not even something they don't even discuss it in the movie. They're all Asian American, and it's almost like Asian American culture has become sort of its own thing, even though there's lots of different influence from different cultures, and definitely, Japanese American, Chinese American, Vietnamese American, or whatever. But to a large extent, the Asian American community, there's a lot of unity between the various heritages.
So, okay, which one should we do next? Nana, can we switch? We ask a question on a different topic. Which one? This one. Filmmaking question. Character development.
Nice.
How did you want to use the relation between the two characters? Why didn't you use one character, but two characters?
Do you mean why do I have Boyd and Jerome, like two main characters?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Well, the reason is because the different things the questions I was trying to explore are, I think, too complicated for one person. If the movie only has Boyd, then it becomes a white person's story. But with Jerome in there, there's an opportunity for a little bit more back and forth, as well as exploring sort of the different side of the coin. Like, Boyd is somebody who is not Japanese, but he speaks Japanese better than Jerome a lot of the time, which is really weird. And then there's something about having, using the format of a buddy comedy to explore these issues, I thought was a way to make it a little bit more even-handed than if it was just one or the other.
Okay. And you can question one of yours. Here. This one.
Why are the two chefs in the Japanese restaurant Mexican? I think they are contrary to Boyd, because they work in Japantown just like Boyd, but they don't speak Japanese. Instead, they turn on the Mexican music in the Japanese restaurant. Do you have any reason about it?
Well, if you go to America, this is another stereotype that I was trying to deconstruct with the movie. But if you go to Japantown or many other Japanese restaurants and you go into the kitchen, usually the people making food are not Japanese, and often they are Latino or Mexican. It's very, very, very common. And so, actually, when you watch the movie in America and that scene comes on with the two Mexican chefs in the back, the audience starts laughing Like it's a huge laugh, one of the biggest laughs in the movie, because just because that's something that's so recognized that no matter what type of food you're going out to eat in America, it's probably made by somebody else, which is a great thing. You know, it speaks to the great variety and the mix of different cultures at play in America, I think. So, like the gentleman in the back row said, when he went to a Japanese restaurant in Japantown, and the person making the food was Chinese. You know, and anywhere you go in America, it's the same thing. There's a great mix of people who are influencing each other, who are borrowing other cultures or somehow participating in another culture's, cultural heritage, whether it's through food or entertainment or whatever.
I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the film you're working on now.
Oh, sure. The movie I'm working on right now is a mystery film, and it's a movie about a Japanese writer, a mystery author who travels to San Francisco, and she falls in love with a guy, and one day he disappears. And then at the same time, there's a body that washes up in a reservoir south of San Francisco that matches his description. So it's my first movie that I did that's not a comedy. And my friend, her name is Fujitani Ayako, plays the lead role, and then a guy named Kitamura Kazuki plays the guy who disappears. So I'm just finishing it up right now, shooting a few last things this weekend, and then it'll be released in Japan next year.
And it's called?
Yeah, I guess it's called Man from Reno.
In Japanese, English, in both?
In English it's called Man from Reno. In Japanese, it's they're probably going to change it, but right now it's called Rino Karakita Otoko.
The language in the film will it be in Japanese and English in both?
Oh, it'll be in both. It's about 50-50.
Any other questions that you have for the students here?
Well, I'm curious. How many of you enjoyed the movie?
Just two? Oh, come on.
Wow. How many of you just thought it was really confusing?
I think more than just two liked the film. Come on. I mean, from what I saw when the film was playing, and I see people laughing and smiling. I'll tell you what, how many people liked watching Big Dreams, Little Tokyo? Now I'm pressuring them, so they're all going to raise their hand.
No, I mean, that's that movie never played much in Japan, so I don't think it ever it was ever really released in Japan. So, and it's interesting to see how people react to it, especially watching it cold. So this has been a really educational experience for me.
Well, I think we're integrating it into the curriculum here because I show it in my clips from it in my introduction to social class every term. And,
cool.
And when we're talking about issues of race, we're talking about identity and authenticity, and so I have some clips of scenes with Boyd from the beginning of the film, and we having drinks with the businessman, or he's meeting with the head of the corporation, and I think the scene where he's being confronted by the guy in the bookstore.
Oh, yeah.
And so I kind of splice those together and show those clips. And another faculty member, we have like a first-year seminar that all the students take in our English language program. And And in his class, they have like a retreat, and they kind of do stuff together. And one of the things is they watch the film, and yeah, he showed his class. Both he and I have shown our classes the entire film. So I think for a group, our students are about half of our English language program is Japanese students, and the other half come from all over the world, from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, from Australia, North America. And so for them, I think it's that interesting thing for a lot of them as people who are learning Japanese or who know it as maybe as a second language, or it's that interesting piece of trying to perform the culture and the identity, but at the same time, right, you're not seen as Japanese. So like here, you're trying to speak it or to act Japanese to try to fit in, but at the same time, you're not really going to fit in because you're not Japanese.
Right.
So I think in that, it's a slightly different angle on it than doing it in Japantown. But I still think it for a number of the students, they get the message in that sense.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to look in to see if I can get like a Japanese subtitled version of it made. At one point, I think that there was one somewhere, but I'll look into that. I do think that the point that that one of your students made that it's really directed more towards an American audience is kind of true in the sense that it's the work of a young and naive filmmaker in a lot of ways. I mean, it's my first movie, and I think that the movie speaks to people who are trying to fit into Japanese culture, probably more than any other group, or people who've had the experience of trying to learn Japanese. But it's interesting to see the questions that it raises among people who are, watching it cold without any other context.
Yeah, I hadn't anticipated some of their. I mean, they came up with questions that I hadn't thought about, or like all the questions about the sumo wrestler. Like to me, it made sense, sort of intuitively, right? That he wants to be Japanese, or what's this really Japanese thing that he could do or he could become? And it's like that's this iconic thing of something that's more uniquely Japanese. It would be the sumo wrestler. I mean, if he were into cosplay or really loved manga and anime, that's kind of become part of this sort of globalized image of cool Japan that's less specifically Japanese. If anything, it might be more popular outside the country than inside the country. And so it wouldn't really touch it in the same way.
Because I don't even, as they were saying that, I was like, man, I wonder what the current Daikyo-teki thing is. I don't know. I think that all the context that we get as Americans in terms of the images that we get of Japan that are kind of ingrained in our collective subconscious are just totally different from what's part of the sense of our culture for Japanese people in Japan. That the ideas don't really come across because there's this sort of weird dissonance between the two.
So that's the class. So Jerome wanted to become sort of really Japanese, right? He wanted to be accepted as a Japanese person and really have this real strong connection and belonging with Japan. So he wanted to become a sumo wrestler, and he thought that was kind of strange. If he's instead of becoming a sumo wrestler, what would seem more real, more authentic? Sumo janakute nani ga? What could he try to do, to become, try to learn? What would seem like a more real, authentic Japanese thing, if not sumo? For somebody your age, right? He was about your age, so. If he wants to be accepted as a young, 20-something-year-old Japanese guy, he would do what? He would become good at what? Something. You tell me what you got.
I think it's the best sumo wrestler.
Sumo wrestlers the best? Now they all like it. Other ideas?
There gotta be, because there gotta be some other ideas in there. Because I'm really curious.
To understand the real modern Japanese culture.
Yeah.
He must live in Japan.
He has to live in Japan. Well, he's in Japantown. So what can he learn? How can he prepare himself before he comes to Japan?
It's not necessarily like where he is or anything. It's what he is, whether that's a job or, it's some kind of identity.
サラリーマンとか社会人とか。If he was, maybe if Jerome was a girl instead of a guy, would he have to like just act very kawaii and wear, just different clothes and speak in a really high voice? How about for a guy? They're having trouble coming up with this one. I think actually it's a really tough question.
Yeah,
I think I think for if he were a woman, there's these models of this kawaii culture or something that he could that's marketed, that's something that. But for young Japanese men, what would be sort of the iconic thing?
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's a hard question.
Because like through the making of this and the promotion of this movie, I've met so many young American women who are sort of experiencing their own cultural journey that's akin to Boyd. They've kind of taken on this identity of a young Japanese girl, even though they are these, blonde-haired, blue-eyed American girls, but they're really into the kawaii culture and they kind of dress like they think a 19-year-old Japanese girl would dress and all kinds of things. It's really, for a while, I took to calling them boydettes.
That's funny.
It's a fascinating cultural phenomenon that I don't I don't know if it's very well known or publicized in Japan, but.
And then I think they'll come. We get some of that with students applying into our program here from the U.S. And you ask them, well, why do you want to? We have interviews with the students, and why do you want to come study in Kyoto? Why do you want to come here? And there's some of them they have this appeal. They really want to, this drawing of this image of Japan, and they're interested in manga and anime and some kind of connection. Any Japanese class that you take in the U.S., at least half the class is going to be Americans who love manga and anime and can sing their favorite song from some anime theme song, and they're drawn, some particular element. But then they come to Japan, and then the Japan that they see is not the Japan that they imagined.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Just like that, you seen that Saturday Night Live skit of the Super Happy Fun Time Now?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's this sort of bizarre American version of what they think Japanese culture is like that is completely disconnected from Japan.
I think
they have no idea what I'm talking about. Yes, 見たことがないけど、それがアメリカのテレビ番組のなんていうの、スキットというの。It's a funny joke on many Americans' image of Japan is not really Japan. It's this crazy manga, anime, cosplay kind of thing that isn't real. Except it's real in Americans' minds, but not real in Japan.
I think one thing that I want people who watch the movie to understand, which I think is very clear to Americans or native English speakers, is just that I am not making fun of Japanese culture or Japanese people. I'm making fun of Americans' sort of image of Japanese culture in a lot of ways. That the satire is not directed at a group of people so much as it is directed at Boyd. You know, he's I don't think that he's like a bad character or anything, but he is. I'm poking fun at him more than anybody else in the movie.
Yeah, in a sense, there's a range of Japanese characters in the film. There isn't sort of like one Japanese character. There's a range of personality types, from the business people to Takaki's character, blowing bubbles in the background, to the nurse, to everybody else. And so you get this diversity of Japanese characters, and at the same time you get Boyd, who's in some ways more Japanese, stereotypically Japanese, than any of the Japanese people in the film. He's more Japanese than any Japanese person in the film in that sense of how he's, performing the identity, and yet you get this nice range, this diversity among the Japanese characters themselves.
But the most stereotypical Japanese character in the movie is Boyd.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's something that is it's a hard line to walk for sure. I mean, whenever you're dealing with issues like that, it's a hot button thing, and it can definitely rub people the wrong way. But I was glad, like, when it's interesting to see different reactions to the movie for sure. I mean, I learn something new every time people watch it.
Okay, well, I thank you. I mean, it's good in front of the screen now, so I'm talking off screen. I thank you very much for your time in getting in touch with us, and for getting us in touch with Perry Shen, and we're looking forward to talking to him in a couple of weeks.
Great with him. Great.
So it's an exciting end for our semester here. So thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to seeing the next film. I watched Daylight Savings last night on iTunes.
Oh, awesome.
So
very cool. Thanks.
So and so round of applause for our guest speaker.
Thanks for all your good questions. Good job.
All right.
All right. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye bye.